Hi, my name is Hannah St. John, and this is my presentation over the science of reading. In this presentation, I am going to discuss why it's imperative that teachers and educators research, learn, and explore the science of reading. The science of reading teaches new and proven methods of ways to learn to read and communicate. The science of reading is important because we want to be able to help our children love to read. That's something that I do with my own son is reading frequently because I want him to want to read. The science of reading was developed by educators and scientists to help teachers understand more appropriate ways of teaching reading, but also why some children might be struggling and what we can do to help them. It also helps teachers and dyslexia coaches, interventionists, LEAs, etc., know how to better assist those struggling readers with more appropriate interventions. And in this presentation, I'm going to be discussing some of the theories of science of reading in the following slides. The simple view of reading was developed by Goff and Tumner. Its formula consists of two very necessary facets or components, and that's decoding times language comprehension equals reading comprehension. And to kind of break it down simply, decoding is automatic word recognition, whereas language comprehension is spoken word. And those two components together are what help build stronger readers, and it helps those readers to retain what they've read. This formula also helps educators to better understand the process in which reading is taught. The next method, which works alongside the simple view of reading, is Scarborough's reading rope, and that was developed by Hollis Scarborough. The rope consists of two intertwined strands. The lower strand is word recognition, and it consists of phonological awareness, decoding, and sight recognition. The upper strand is language comprehension, and it consists of background knowledge, vocabulary, language structure, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge. The representation of these two strands being woven together is that when these skills are mastered by a reader, you will then have someone who is skilled at reading. The next is the 4-part mental processor, and that was developed by Siedenberg and McClellan. I apologize if I'm not pronouncing any of these names correctly. The 4-part processor kind of breaks down the 4 areas of our brain that help with reading. The context and meaning processors are developed on the left side of our brain, and those help to develop language comprehension. The back kind of frontal lobe is the phonological processor, and this controls speech sounds and being able to understand those speech sounds. In the lower back portion of the brain is the orthographic processor, and this controls the way we comprehend printed words and spelling. This controls the way we're able to develop our reading skills. All 4 parts of these areas must work together effectively in order to build a strong reader. So if one part of this is not clicking, or it's not working, or there's a deficit, the likelihood of there being a deficit in one of the other areas is high. Airy's 4 phases of word reading. This was developed by Lena Airy. She was a psychologist, I believe, and she discussed the 4 phases that a developing reader goes through in order to become a strong reader. And so the first phase that someone would go through is pre-alphabetic, and this is where a beginning reader would sit, so probably my 4-year-old. Students rely heavily on visuals to help them understand stories. So just like he looks at a book and looks at what's going on in the pictures to help him understand or to read that story, that would be the pre-alphabetic phase, because he's not able to put any of those words together. The second is the partial alphabetic phase. In this phase, this is where students recognize some letters and use those to form short words. So maybe they recognize the word cat, and they're able to, because they know those letters C-A-T, those 3 basic, they're able to look at that and kind of put together those short words. The next is full alphabetic phase, and this is where students have good working knowledge of graphemes and phoneme connections. They're able to use their decoding skills and memory to help them read well. And the last phase is called the consolidated alphabetic phase. And this phase is where students are able to think back and utilize all of the skills that they've learned and previously developed to help them learn larger words. And so that is where a very skilled reader sits. So if I am reading through a book and I come across a word that I don't know, I'm able to use, or a word that's not in my vocabulary, I'm able to use the skills that I have in order to figure out what that word is. Moving forward to phonological awareness, this is where students are able to hear sounds in words to help them manipulate phonemes. Children who aren't able to hear the sounds in sounds or blend the sounds together to make words are going to have a very difficult time learning to read. Possessing a phonological deficit can be a strong indicator that a child is going to struggle to read. Phonics is a correlation between sounds and their spellings. Phonics is kind of the ultimate goal of the alphabetic principle. Students need to possess strong phonics skills so that they're able to rely on those skills in order to put letters together rather than relying on visuals or memorization like we talked about prior. Phonics helps children to understand that what they're reading for better reading retention. Fluency. Fluency helps a reader to be able to read with more accuracy. This allows them to have more of a smoothness or a flow when they're reading, if that makes sense. Fluent readers are able to read with prosody, and they tend to have a deeper comprehension level to what they're reading because they know how to read. Fluent readers also have a tendency to read more than non-fluent readers because they're not struggling to get those words or to understand them. This also kind of correlates to our next slide of vocabulary. Vocabulary is the knowledge of words and word meanings. This is what holds all of it together. It's that glue that we talk about. If you don't have a working vocabulary toolbox, you're going to struggle to understand what you're reading. If you don't have a very wide vocabulary because maybe you're not reading a lot, you really are going to struggle with reading any kind of passage because you're not gonna know the words. Readers with a large vocabulary knowledge are going to have a much deeper level of reading comprehension because they're going to actually understand what they're reading as well as the meaning and the context. Code emphasis versus meaning emphasis are two different approaches to reading instruction. Code emphasis focuses on decoding skills. So letters and words, whereas meaning emphasis focuses on reading comprehension and reading and understanding whole words. I think it's just kind of a preference, but educators really need to be mindful when they use either of those approaches and make sure that the curriculum that they're using doesn't confuse the two, because that could hurt any student who's learning to read. Orthographic mapping. I love this little graphic because it breaks it down, but it still gives kind of a fruitful explanation. Orthographic mapping is the process we use to permanently store words into long-term memory. Orthographic mapping, David Kilpatrick is behind that, and this is the ability to efficiently add words to your sight word vocabulary. So anytime we see a word that we don't know or aren't familiar with, we turn it into a sight word. Orthographic mapping helps us to be able to store that word for long-term use. It's instant word recognition. In conclusion, automaticity in reading is really the goal for our students. Phonics, phonological awareness, fluency, and vocabulary all work together to help develop an automatic reader. Science of reading is all about developing a skillful reader who possesses the tools necessary to help them develop strong reading comprehension. And this is my slide of references. I hope that you can fully see those there. So again, my name is Hannah St. John, and I appreciate you listening to my presentation. Thank you.